My content is for 13 and up, or adult collectors of the product. Hey everyone, this took a long time to do, so I do hope you enjoyed. I do want to mention that obviously with tiering anything, there are just general truths for Beyblade and part performance, so please keep this in mind. Obviously nothing would be 100%, but just general truths about these parts. And I try to do my best to factor a lot of stuff. Obviously you can't mention every single possible thing, but yeah, I hope you do enjoy. I tried my best to make sure as fair as possible to most parts and tried to factor it in, specifically with the standard burst stadium. If it's DB, then probably some things just move a little bit down, but most of it should pretty much stay the same for the most part. Regardless, let's get started. Cores. On B tier, we have Hello Kitty and right spin, so I like to specify the dual spin for the core stuff, mostly because I think this does matter a little bit, because some do better in right, some do better in left. Now with the Hello Kitty core, first of all, I think the locks in it are okay. I did refer to it as a Spriggan clone, I just, because of how much it reminded me a bit of Spriggan. I think I would generally prefer the Kitty core over Spriggan. Against right stamina stuff, it's just alright. It's nothing that's that crazy, in my opinion. The locks are okay on it, and I also want to probably throw in this whole thing of the BU locks because it's not really that important to mention, but I'll have a quick explanation, probably some image of me explaining what the BU locks are. Moving on to the A tier, we have Hello Kitty in left spin. So for left spin, Hello Kitty just manages to work a little bit better. Whether or not it's going up against Helios or Longinus, it does manage to hold its ground decently well, where you could maybe work out like on a Vanish Hello Kitty combination for it to work. It's more just like a kind of like a funny combination, like the stamina is not too bad and kind of get it to work. The teeth are not ideal for what I'd like it to be, because the stamina is how it is. I gotta just say, well, it works in that regard. Moving on, we have Belial 3. So it's literally just a better Belial 2 in every regard. The teeth are a lot better. I do not like the triangular teeth, mostly because they kind of just break down a little bit easier, and it's not really what I like, even if the locks kind of feel tough. I do prefer generally the blockier teeth, and you get strong locks and more or less the same stamina as Belial 2, so it's just a better Belial 2 in every regard, really. Also in regards to the gimmick, when you do a strong shoot, a burst stopper appears. This allows for great burst resistance, and ideally I like to use this on something like Savior for an example, since it helps the issue with Savior's recoil problem. Another thing to mention as well is due to the variant in the burst stopper for how strong it can be. If for whatever reason you get a really tough mold where the stopper is just way too much, I have a video on the other channel where I explain how you can repair it and make it not much of an issue if you do encounter it. I want to be honest with you, Knight is kind of like the middest out of everything in A. It's just okay enough where it's kind of above anything in B, but I'm not too crazy on Knight. Now Knight's teeth are okay at best, and the stamina is okay. It's just an A just because of what it's able to do. Now you could make an argument for Knight for defense, because its gimmick is vertical teeth, and because it can kind of work for defense, you could maybe make the argument that Knight can be used for defense alright. It kind of just does an okay enough job where it can kind of absorb some hits, but because of how they did the teeth and everything, even pure defense, Knight is not too crazy, but it's just alright. Next up we have Helios. Now here's the thing with Helios. Despite Helios being an A right now, I want you to listen very carefully. Helios could either be an A or it could be an S. I've had to actually test this just to be sure, and that's why I say there's always variance. Helios can either be very clapped depending on what you get. You literally have to test it. In general, you have to test in general, but Helios can go toe-to-toe with Longinus and be pretty even. I still think Helios will get clapped by Achilles and even get clapped by Spriggan too, but you could get a Helios where it could work out. So Helios, it goes under the ballpark of where you could use Helios, and if you test and it works out, you could probably do fine enough. Next up, we have Achilles core in right spin. Now in right spin, I think it just does okay enough, and keep in mind the Achilles locks, it feels kind of similar to Longinus, not quite the same teeth structure, but I feel it's okay enough where you get some decent enough locks, and you can do okay with right spin. Next up, we have the Kerbeus core. Now this is where it gets very specific and interesting. There's the original Kerbeus core, the red and yellow one, the red and white one, and the black rubber and the gold. So first of all, for rubber hardness, your toughest I believe goes because like red and yellow, red and green, probably like red and white. Red and white and black and gold are kind of interchangeable for me. But in terms of just rubber hardness, because with the Kerbeus core, there's a rubber on there that helps actually give resistance to not only using this for stamina for defense, but also for attack combinations for recoil. Though it does depend in context. I've even said this for Bahamut, that Bahamut could also be used for attack. Generally, it does depend on what you're using, and it does depend how fresh your core is. Sometimes you could die really bad to too much recoil and just slide and burst right away. So generally for Kerbeus core, while you could potentially use this on something like Ultimate, Nexus plus D, like Extreme Dash, Metal Extreme, it's probably just that for attack. Otherwise, it would be for stamina. Now, I think the stamina on this can either just be, it depends on what setup. On Dynamite F, I just think it's alright enough where it can be used. On Wind specifically, I kind of do like it a bit on Wind. More specific, I believe it to be the red and the white one, though you would have to test to see how the other cores fare if you get better or worse results. Also, due to the rubber burst stoppers on the Kerbeus core, if you put it on a BU lock disc, whether it be Moon or Xanthus, it does manage to actually hit the tabs of the BU lock discs, making the rubber lock kind of effective there, and the same would apply to Bahamut too. It's kind of a neat thing that was discovered. I generally just favor that one since I've gotten the most balance out of this. This is likely just due to how the rubber is placed and likely again just the random core variants of Beyblade Burst. But this is a core that's not that bad for stamina, and I've lost to this core using top cores, so I gotta give credit to Kerbeus where it's due. It's a solid enough core. Next up is where you get to S. Now I want to mention generally with anything that I ever refer to in S, whatever is top stuff is interchangeable with each other. You could use any one of them, you could probably do okay. Now we have the Excalibur core in S. Now, why is Excalibur in S? It's only specifically because of Xiphoid. Otherwise, it'd probably be way, way lower. The reason why is because the Excalibur core, even though the teeth are kind of clapped for their design, because how the core works is essentially that the sword will pop up after a few clicks. I kind of gave it some weird clicks just so it can get that gimmick working. The gimmick does actually work. Now I have to explain the entirety of Xiphoid, essentially, with Xiphoid, and how the Excalibur core works. If you want to do something that is called Critfoid, where Critfoid, and this is a combo that was thought up by Think, the idea of this, it's where it utilizes a normal driver and a BU lock disc, either Moon or Xanthus, to work with Xiphoid and the Excalibur core, so that way you can activate the sword easier. And what this does is this actually adds weight to your impact, and it does actually work. Of course, that combination is in the realm of it can work, but also kind of risky, so it's kind of comp and kind of for fun at the same time. But either way, even if you don't want to use Critwood, there are other setups we can mention. Like I do have to mention this because we are talking about it, which would be Xiphoid Excalibur with the one armor on Spread Dash, Extreme Dash, Quick Dash for an example. That also works pretty effectively. Next up we have Spriggan 2. Now Spriggan 2 does have some really solid enough locks. I think the locks are pretty good. Now again, it's really interchangeable between right and left. It depends what course you have, what you go up against, all that stuff. Generally left seems pretty solid and right seems pretty solid. So for Spriggan, obviously because it's not really melee or any weights there, you generally just use this for stamina combinations. Like we previously just talked about Excalibur, which was specifically for attack. The rest of the cores I'm going to be mentioning are really just more stamina use. I mean, you could use it for other stuff if you wanted to, unless I say otherwise, but it's generally just really just stamina, unless I say something else. Next up, we have Lucifer and Hyperion. They're both under the same ballpark here. If I had to say in my personal experience, I've noticed that they're kind of very, very even with each other. Like Helios and Longinus are even. Okay, Hyperion and Lucifer are pretty even with each other. So generally, like I said, it could be any one of these cores I mentioned in the list for like Achilles and left. I think it's probably the best for left, but I've heard Helios can also do pretty good. So again, it really just depends what mold you have. Do the testings to find it out, because even if I say it's in this area, doesn't mean 100%. So then after we have the Dragon Core, so I gotta mention this. So obviously, first of all, let's go over what the teeth are. The locks I think are fine. This is a better Valkyrie one in every regard. Obviously, if you use extensively on dash, you will wear pretty bad in die. And in general, be wary of dash stuff because of how the teeth are. It is a little bit annoying to deal with, but with the bound core specifically, it is really annoying. Either way, it is a better Valkyrie. It does have like half a bound because of how the teeth are in locks. The way it's a way, way better Valkyrie in my opinion, not only for stamina, but just for I think usefulness. I think Valkyrie could still use and probably do okay, but I just like Dragon a bit more. Now, if you're talking pure pure defense, where this would shine and be on a prominence combination, the tank on attack. Now, first of all, why does bound attack fail but bound defense work? Bound attack doesn't work because the idea is that you're supposed to hit and repel at the same time, but you're not going to have as much force as you want to actually make that work effectively. That's why for bound defense it makes more sense, because when they're pushing on you and you're pushing them back, it's because you're actually defending, you're holding your position, you're actually repelling attacks properly, because when you're offensive, all that recoil stuff, it just doesn't work out. Alrighty, we got blades now. Okay, so let's just go with the hated tier. Barricade against right spin stuff. The flaps just make it deplete stamina way too fast. Can't be used against attack, can't be used against same spin stamina, so against same spin stuff, clapped. Then after you got Divine, so Divine is very much a parody of Ultimate Valkyrie in its shape, much like previous Belials being a parody of Valkyrie in shape. So basically, with Divine, it has like this metal weighting on it, which the idea would maybe be like metal weights on it to help support it for the attack. There are just, if you look at the side profile, there's just massive gaps. It gets uppered on itself, poor stamina without any of the gears and everything. It's really probably one of the worst blades you could use in DB or BU. Then after you get the C tier, which would be Divine with F gear and Divine with L and F gear. So F gear kind of does support Divine a little bit, but attack doesn't work out too much. Stamina, same and opposite spin, still does not work out too much, even with L gear and all that help. If you really wanted some massive cope, you could say that against opposite spin stuff, you could maybe make it work. Otherwise, you're really just like using a dead horse. Then after you have Zest without any of the attachments, mostly the reason, now first of all, Zest, its shape in general is a pretty good shape. It's just not too consistent, but like basically I have to explain Zest now. So Zest has these little nubs on here, and the idea with Zest is that Zest, if it hits you there, you're gonna go dead. And the shape isn't too bad, it's just consistency of those nubs hitting you, which is really annoying. And anyways, it's too light without any of the armor on it, so that's why Zest is where it is, whether or not it's right or left, since this is dual spin use. For B tier, you have Chain. Now, while Chain can be regarded as a defense type, I do want to specifically talk about stamina for a second. Against same spin and opposite spin stamina, you're looking at pretty poor performance. Same spin, you can maybe argue if you somehow get lucky. Same with opposite. Now, in terms of tanking attack, against any left spin attack, it does pretty poor, especially against things like Guilty. It just, I don't know, it just really gets clapped so hard, just gets flinged away so easily. Now, against right spin attack is where you can kind of see Chain, and Chain reminds me a little bit of Roar, but not as good, where it basically utilizes high recoil, where you could potentially stop an attack type by making them burst with a high recoil, but it's really dependent on how you use it. That being said, also Chain is dependent on what core you have. If you have Kerbeus core, the chains are freely out. If you have any other core, the chains are locked out. I generally would prefer the chains kind of just with the Kerbeus core, to be quite honest. I think it works better. I think with the chains out, I don't feel it as strong, unless you wanted to use it with Belial 3, for an example, with that burst resistance, then maybe you can make the argument. Otherwise, it's very inconsistent defense. Now, this is where it kind of gets interesting. Now, Gatling is also in B. Now, the thing is with Gatling is that Gatling for same spin is kind of in the same boat as Chain Kerbeus for stamina. It's just kind of It's just kind of for the use for stamina, which is fine because it's supposed to be used for attack. But even for attack, whether or not it's with Nexus plus D or even illegal, and I would even use this on like Perseus for an example, it's still not that crazy. It's still, the issue with Gatling is that it's raised compared to other blades, so you are working at a disadvantage already. I think it does have some uses, but nothing really else to mention aside from one thing which can kind of work, which is Gatling kind of for defense. So it does kind of have this gimmick of the sliding. Now, how this would work is that basically it would kind of supposed to slide your opponent when it kind of like deflect, because you're supposed to go from two states of normal to like this oval state. But I don't know, if you get on like like Perseus over a rise, you can maybe kind of try to tank-ish attack, but you have to launch it really specifically to kind of like angle it and try to get those hits on it. Either way, I think it's just okay. Now you get Divine with H gear, A gear, A gear, A gear, L gear. Now, in all of these cases, it's just kind of a mid attacker. It still has the issue with the gaps, but what A gear allows, and specifically in attack mode, defense mode's terrible, but specifically in attack mode, where it aligns with the blades, you can kind of get okay-ish enough attack where it's like, it's okay, it's okay. The gaps on it still hurt it quite a bit and make it pretty much hurt, but regardless too of the mode on H gear, whether it's low or high mode, though I've generally kind of liked high mode with H gear Divine a little bit more on the hits I can get. It's more or less just kind of an inconsistent attacker and not as effective as anything above it. Speaking of inconsistent, you have Zest with the armor on like attack, on defense mode, which all of them I really just used for attack, like I've just mentioned with the nubs. Now the thing is with Zest is that Zest, if you got it to work like, and it was 100% that there wouldn't be any inconsistency, and Zest would probably shoot its way a little bit more up. Aside from the issue of weight, which matters a lot in against attack matchups, it's far too inconsistent. While I did praise it, I did later realize that perhaps I should have tried even more to be sure. It's just too inconsistent for attack. It can work. I prefer left spin because it's a lot safer to use. The reason why is because with left spin, you cover the ground of going up against Vanish, and against other stuff, you can do probably okay enough. I also put in here Zyphoid, but extremely worn. Now the Zyphoid blade, because I have to mention this now, can go from the state of fresh to worn to very worn. Now this is not at the fault of TAKARA TOMY, surprisingly. It is literally just how the bays are because they've had to evolve this far. So when you get to an extremely worn state with Zyphoid, it's still kind of usable, but you will still struggle quite a bit. Then after we get to A tier, which again, Zyphoid. Now Zyphoid, when it's kind of worn, where the point is just kind of a little bit gone, still pretty usable for attack. The reason why it's an A for Worn Void, which is the nickname, is because it does struggle a little bit more against opposite spin stuff, but generally with a good enough launch and with the right setup on combos I've previously mentioned, you should be okay enough. Gatling for opposite spin stamina is pretty sick. Because of how it's raised, it's essentially like you're just running this on high mode, and you can kind of clown on some left spin stamina stuff. Not 100%, but with Super King, there is all the different fusions for Super and King. Now, how this would work, okay, there's a half of King that's metal, there's a half of King that's rubber. You can make double metal, double rubber. Same with Hyperion, double metal, double rubber. And you can do Super King, where it's the Helio side and the Hyperion side together for a Super King fusion. Now, here's the thing. Now, if you want to do pure opposite spin equalization, I prefer it with the rubber variants. They can kind of do some funny stuff. Otherwise, in terms of pure attack, you almost always should just be using the metal variant. The reason for this is just because, other than I think just the shape, it does hit a little bit better. Not only that, but just the weight on it. So it's generally more preferable for attack, and this just goes for both spins. I think both spins, they're good enough for attack, though what I would say is that I prefer Super more for right spin, and I prefer King more for left spin, but King can be used for right spin attack, like on King Kerbeus, and Super could be used for attack on like Super Longinus. Super King is generally just the most inconsistent out of them. What Super King does is basically crit attacks, which I've mentioned crit void. The whole idea with the idea of crit is that you just randomly get a strong hit on. It's kind of same here. It's just very inconsistent, but otherwise pretty solid, all things considered, for both. Next up with Burst, which is going to be a bit of controversy. Now Burst I have ranked in A, only because it's very hard for pure consistency's sake. Now Burst, first of all, I want to mention this, that it does have many stoppers on there, which is good for burst resistance when it's able to stop the disc from sliding as much. Obviously those plastic little tabs will wear over time. Now for both the right and the left spin, they're both more or less the same kind of consistency. Now this is where I have to mention balance tuning. So balance tuning is basically when you reassemble the disc and the parts to where you're not as shaky. Now Burst, in general it's important, but Burst specifically, because Burst likes to tilt and fall down a lot, you could have this at a big disadvantage towards you. Now for attack combinations, it does aight. Sometimes because of just how big it is and wide it is, you can get some really nice smacks in and it can work for attack. So I consider this a jack of all trades. Now, same spin stamina, you can more or less do okay. Depends, obviously, what combo you're using. Now, specifically with Burst, I don't think for stamina you should be using Bearing Dash. Not only because Bearing Dash just falls down a lot and can destabilize sometimes, but since Burst also has that weakness, it's kind of just suicide in a match. So, specifically, I would say use Bearing Drift if you would want to, but I think Burst shines the best on Mobius Bearing. Because of how tall that driver is, skills, it pairs up so nicely with Burst because you're basically losing your height and your weight to your advantage, to where same spin, you can probably do okay enough. And against opposite spin is where it does incredible. Sparing Mobius, I find this to work probably the best. Now, generally, I prefer the left side over the right side. The right side can work, but I prefer the left side. Sparing Mobius is a little bit of a difficult situation because right spin, I have not been able to yield quite as good of results with the left spin. This is mostly due to the fact that not only does the Burst blade have rubber on two sides, which is what helps for that impact for attack in its shape, but the metal side is on the left side, and I think that weight on it, instead of it being below and above, works a little bit better there. Now with Mobius sparing paired up with it, how it can work is that it basically, even though it kind of tilts around, it kind of weirdly stabilizes itself quite a bit, and generally in opposite spin equalization, this thing can be kind of deadly, and this thing can take down strong combinations. I use BDR and opposite spin equalization, making it a very solid option to use. Next up in S tier, we obviously have a fresh Xiphoid. This is what I consider to rival Guilty, despite weight difference. At its sharpest point, this thing can clap almost anything, and it does such a tremendous job. If you want to use it fresh, then you got to be conservative on the rounds that you're using this with. If you're just for fun, then either way you have to watch out. Actually, in general, you just have to watch out, but that sharp contact just gives that one blow that it needs just to kill stuff. Next up, we have Wind. Wind, I would consider to be generally better than Dynamite plus F, but Dynamite plus F can definitely beat it. Depends what combo, what setup. I just generally prefer Wind. Wind, I think I like a little bit more defensively too. It is able to tank attacks, I think, teeny bit better than Dynamite F. Obviously, you know, preference is preference. Now it works super good. Same spin stamina, super good. Opposite spin, it works great too. It's literally just a big circle. Okay, so for defense, for all this stuff, it should be a given. Against attack stuff, I've already mentioned that it can work well enough, and it has two modes, down force and upper force. Really, all you need to know is that whatever has this part exposed of the plastic, that's the mode that you want. Next up, we have Barricade and opposite spin. Now this is not only opposite spin in terms of equalization, but opposite spin just in defense. Now Barricade is best used on BDR. Unless it's very specific, I will most likely just not mention a driver to be paired up with it unless it really does need it. I don't like Barricade on anything else that isn't just really BDR. I think BDR works best because of how defensively it is compared to, let's say, something like Bearing, but also just because for equalization, it works really well. We're able to kind of sit on top of left stuff, but specifically against stuff like left spin attack like Guilty, if you launch full force, which is what you should be doing against Guilty, you can tank kind of enough attacks. It's probably your best example of defense against something like Guilty, which is pretty solid. And against left spin stuff, you generally want to kind of just weak launch it so it can equalize. When I've hard launched it, I've noticed I've gotten kind of a little bit worse results. Surprisingly, the armor is where this is the shortest segment. In F, it's 1. Now here's the argument you can make now that I have to talk about 1. 1 can technically be an S because of the fact that 1 is specifically designed for Xiphoid, even though what pisses me off is, aside from just the weight, it doesn't really align with Xiphoid in low mode. It does with high mode, but either way, the weight distribution is okay enough to work with Xiphoid. Next up in B tier, you have H gear. Now the reason why H gear is in B tier is because of the fact that you can only use it with Divine. Well, there's two modes, one where it's on top and one if you have it on the bottom, it can work for some resistors. You kind of get a little bit lighter than L gear, but even then it doesn't boost Divine enough where I can say it goes up there, and it's not compatible with other stuff, so it's there. Now next up we have 8. I called this 4. I always confuse them. Either way, it has the same weight distribution as similar to 4, 0, and 10. Its issues that it's generally pretty low for weight. It can kind of be okay for stamina, but especially with how the weight is, it is kind of sad to see how like hollowed it is. Also in A, you're gonna get 4. Here's the thing with 4. I don't like it for stamina because on stamina stuff, it falls down a little bit too much. In general, it kind of falls down a little bit weird. Now you could use it for attack stuff just for pure weight, I guess, but I don't like how stuff falls a little bit at the end. That's why it's an A and not an S. Okay, starting us off, we have Moon. Now, also to mention that Moon is a BU lock disc, as it has those metal nubs that work specifically with BU cores. It's just to mention that and Xanthos are BU lock discs. Both of these discs suffer from the same weakness due to how thick that they are. They scrape a lot in the stadium, and especially for attack combos, can get a little bit annoying. Doesn't mean all the time, just means that it can be a big weakness to these discs in battle. Moon in general, stamina is really not that good. Opposite spin is not really that good, and not even for attack. I don't know whether they actually thought about how these discs are supposed to work or what. Next up is Wing Dash. Now with Wing Dash is basically like a diet spread dash. It kind of has a little bit whack burst resistance. Those holes aren't really helping it. It's just got this really wacky shape. You could kind of use it for attack. It's really just the same as spread dash, really. The stamina is okay enough. You could also use it for attack if you wanted to. It's just okay. Just the resistance there is not too crazy, but I don't know. It can kind of work enough where it's kind of stable just to be alright, but I would never consider using the disc. I really only consider anything really an S unless very specific, but it's okay. It's okay. Similar to Moon and Xanthus, they're both in pretty much in the same placement in that regard. Fortress, I like quite a bit actually. So in general stamina, Fortress does okay. Kind of reminds me a bit of Giga for kind of application of use, since more or less it's a similar shape. Otherwise, nothing really else to say. It is a nice compact disc. Moving on to S tier, you have Nexus with D gear. Now more or less you get the exact same use as you do with S gear for attack. Other stuff you'd probably prefer S gear, I suppose. Like for an example, I would probably use for like Nexus plus S Mobius instead of Nexus plus D Mobius, just because of how the shape is. Now it does have a bound attack, quote unquote, where it's basically sliding back and forth. Now really this bound thing doesn't really do too much in reality. It's just better than S gear because of the fact that it doesn't scrape as much. Then after you have Fortress, which would specifically just be for attack. I like it really on Guilty because it just works so well with Guilty. You could get this to work on other stuff, more specifically just Savior, since Ultimate it really is just more of an NX plus D, NX plus S kind of use. Spread Dash. So Spread Dash shines very nicely on attack combinations, specifically stuff like Zyphoid. You could use it for other attacks if you want, like Savior for an example. I generally prefer Fortress over Spread Dash when it comes to Guilty. I would probably prefer Spread Dash over Fortress when it comes to Zyphoid, just because I think how it pairs up with the shapes, I feel it just works better in that regard. Spread Dash just makes basically Guilty on Fortress, the equivalent in that right spin is like Zyphoid on like Spread Dash. That's how I basically feel about it. They just smack really well and they work very well together. Next up we have Illegal. Now this is basically the same as Over, except Over is more better for defense and Illegal is better for attack. It is a little bit thicker than Over. It has more or less the same stamina as Over, and I prefer actually, for an example, honestly, I think Over is a good disc. I kind of like BDR with Illegal a little bit more than I would with Over BDR. Even Barry Mobius, I would probably say the same. Now, obviously, there's other drivers and stuff where you could maybe see some use, and it depends what you're using. Maybe you could scrape, no scrape. This also works for attack, I would say fine enough. If you want a nice spicy combo, you got Savior on Illegal. I think it pairs up nicely with Illegal on there. Otherwise, yeah, moving on. Now, next up for your drivers, you have Metal Dimension. So first of all, the gimmick with Dimension is that the rubber can be exposed or not exposed depending if you have it on balance or attack. Now, because it's rubber, it eventually wears down and all your modes just become pure attack. A metal lock driver is essentially just an updated from the plastic cap where it's metal. The idea was supposed to be weights and all this stuff, yada yada yada. The old metal caps could wear teeth really bad. The new ones don't do it as bad. Yes, it can still happen, but it's a lot easier for it to not happen, but it's still possible, obviously. The issue here is that they have worse resistance than a normal driver, even though they're kind of similar because they slide easier. It's kind of useless, and because especially here, it just bursts way too easily. Next up in D, you have Revolve Dash. Now Revolve was this nice little kind of conish shape where it had a little free spin plate, and the issue here is just other than it being too short, it's way too outclassed by their stamina stuff. Sword Dash has like two metal swords poking out on it and a jaggy sword shape. The issue here is that you can't properly flower pattern. It's very inconsistent and doesn't have too much use. Moving on to Just Dash. So this is where it has a free rotating guard on it, where I think it's supposed to be like recovery or whatever. It doesn't really work. The same with regular Just. The issue here is that it's even more outclassed than Sparking since it scrapes more. It's got a tiny sharp, and similar to Bounce, which I'll mention in a second, had they just done a yielding shape, it would have been way better. Bounce is basically where it's kind of like nothing but more cringe. It's kind of got a similar issue to Just. The issue is that the guard is placed like more downward, so you just scrape a little bit easier. It's not even free spin. Overall, it's kind of just boring and dies too easily. Same and opposite spin. You don't get any use out of anything here. Adventure's gimmick is similar to Venture, where it's basically supposed to accelerate. This does it technically better than Venture does, but whereas in either way, the stamina is not too effective because for attack, or what you're going to be using this for, it's too passive and you pure rubber attack for DB stuff, so it's useless there. Yard Dash has the same issue as actual Yard, just scrapes too much, especially in the DB stuff. It's okay, same spin, opposite spin, don't even bet on it. High Charge Dash, no, really, this is more just a guilty thing because guilty's guilty, but guilty can kind of troll with a lot of drivers, and if you go up against Vanish with this, you can kind of do some funny stuff. It's really just the same spin for attack drivers. Yeah, High Charge Dash is just a troll same spin attack driver. It doesn't really work out too well, it's too passive, but if you want to bully for weight, you can maybe make it work. Otherwise, a little bit too passive in my tasting, but on guilty against Vanish with High Charge Dash, you can do some funny stuff. Wedge Dash, wedges can kind of be okay enough same spin, but not too crazy. You generally want the overdisc on this to make it kind of work, but either way, it's hard to outclass by other stuff. Then after you got Charge Metal Dash, basically more or less the same thing, just really same spin use. It's too passive to really do too much. If you want to troll with guilty against Vanish, you probably could, otherwise it's kind of just whatever. Next up in B tier, you have All Might with D gear, and this would also count All Might with D gear and V gear, obviously. More or less just similar to just All Might with S gear, nothing that notable where it's that different for its use. All Might's gimmick is that there's a spring where it kind of supposed to repel stuff. You don't really get too much craziness with attack because it's not that consistent, and the free sprinting plate when you do a hard launch becomes a locked plate, but either way you don't get too much consistency whether it's the DB stadium or whether it's the standard stadium. Adventure plus V, and this would also be Adventure with VS. I kind of like this a little bit more than Venture plus V, just by a teensy bit. I like a little bit more stamina. Now basically the VS gear is just metal and a little bit of a free spin on there. It's just wider than V gear and I think has a little bit more stability, but if this was maybe like a stamina, like kind of a cone shape like I've been saying, then maybe. Otherwise, nah. Also for B tier, I'm just throwing this there, Planet Dash, since it's just going to be a Dash version of Planet, and I can't really think of anything too crazy they could probably do, it's probably just going to go in here. If you slap it on over illegal, you can probably do some troll stuff, but Planet in general just won't be enough to really go up to the higher tier stuff too consistently. But yeah, it had the gimmick of the free rotating ball and the other balls on the side there that kind of moved around, but it's just okay. It's just okay. Atomic Dash is an okay same spin driver because of how you have to factor in opposite spin stuff and that type of meta. That's why a lot of stuff I just slap in B. Same spin, it's okay. Just okay. That's alright. Doesn't do anything that impressive. High Eternal is where it's very specific because of quality control issues. If you get a shaky shaft, it's pretty much clapped and it goes really low. Otherwise, it probably goes a little bit up there for same spin, really just in B. It's just okay, and opposite, you're gonna get clapped too easily, and it's kind of just the height and the shape of it doesn't work out too crazy. More or less the same thoughts for High Revolve, same spin use for stamina, and again also High Wave Dash, same spin use for stamina. Opposite, don't really bet on it. Now there's a spicy combo that was thought up by Jonathan from the WBO, which is Gatling. I think it's like high mode and like Moon on High Wave Dash. You can kind of troll opposite spin stuff, and it can kind of work kind of like tanky-ish, though I have noticed I have had it chip in battles, so be wary of that. Explosion. Now this also applies to Explosion Dash. So if Explosion Dash, when that eventually comes out, if that solves the issue, then maybe. The issue with Explosion is that the rubber is really hard. So your first issue is that it's very hard to grip on the stadium. It also has a free rotating shaft where it can kind of have a little bit of an issue kind of scraping a teensy bit, but sometimes you can get it to work for attack, and if it gripped a little bit better, I would like it quite a bit. Its shape kind of starts off kind of like a jolt shape, and then after it kind of melts down, you use it, but it's like, okay, it's a decent enough attack driver. Now, if Explosion Dash has the same more or less rubber hardness, then it stays in the same place. If it has softer rubber, then it probably goes to A, possibly even S. Zeal is where same spin, it is kind of clapped against some stuff. You can kind of troll against bearing, I'll give you that. So you could say that for a lot of stuff. It's just okay for same spin stamina, I would say. And for KO defense, it's really poor. I think the community has tried to gaslight me into thinking that it's okay for defense. Not really. Aside from the fact that it has this issue where because the rubber's hard, it can't really grip too much of the stadium, because then you need soft soft rubber if you want to grip properly. And also it's just very tiny for what it is, and it wears down pretty fast. So for that, I just kind of have it there. Now for A tier, you have Zeal and Opposite Spin. You can kind of get some nice results because it has a free spin shaft similar to Explosion, and you can kind of get some use out of it there. Next up is Quattro Dash. Now Quattro same spin, specifically just like the defensive mode. You could get the cone shape of stamina to also kind of work, but I kind of just like it for pure defense, same spin stamina. It just really works in that regard. The other options don't really work out too well. The Unite mode doesn't work too well because for the height that it is, you can't really make it get used for defense like how Unite was used. And also the same issue with the attack mode is that regardless of rubber, which I do think is pretty neat, because of how it is and because of the skirt of Quattro Dash, it just skips the ridge too easily. Now we got Metal Never. Now Metal Never, I think same spin is okay. Opposite Spin, it shines really well. More or less the same use as Never, just it has a weaker resistance because obviously the metal cap. The free spin is the best on this Never. Opposite Spin, it just does so many nice things. Same spin can also work, but generally the thing to know with Never is that for opposite spin, if you get a little bit worn and kind of better opposite spin. Same spin, when you get a little bit worn, it goes a little bit more aggressive, but same spin I think is just, it's alright enough. Also, Moment Dash. Moment Dash is a little bit sad. I think defense not even that bad. Moment Dash basically has a free spin guard that can kind of catch the ridge on the stand and kind of work okay for defense. And the stamina, honestly, because of how much more free spin it is compared to the previous moment, it's the best moment. My issue is because of the options above, it kind of clowns on Moment Dash too bad and had no time to shine. Now, for bearing drift and metal bearing drift, more or less the same. Now, keep in mind that with how bearings can vary on free spin, and if you don't store them properly, they can obviously just die, which just store them properly, just keep them isolated, right? Now, generally, they are the best same spin and opposite spin options, generally. Very consistent same spin. It's basically solving the issue with drift for same spin, just added with a bearing. Very high stamina because of the round shape. It goes really crazy at the end. More or less the same with metal bearing drift for application. For KO defense, this is where it gets a little bit tricky. Now, it can kind of be okay for same spin KO defense. Opposite spin, it's a troll, dude. It's a troll with how much it can kind of hold on attacks. Not perfect, but it does do pretty nice. Now, Mobius bearing or whatever. So here's the thing. It does worse than BDR unless there's a specific combo where you would want to use it, but it's generally still as high of stamina. It does worse against attack because of the height and how easy it is to KO it. But opposite spin, it does pretty good because of the height. Same spin, you can do okay. Same spin is really weird because you're basically just grinding your opponent to death. Pause. But otherwise, if you want an exceptional combination using bearing Mobius, you can try out Burst Bahamut on illegal bearing Mobius with the 0 armor. This is very good for opposite spin equalization. It is possible to win same spin, but this is just more or less giving the example of how it can perform against stuff like bearing drift and get some decent cool wins. So as we are ending off, I want to give a huge thank you to Dan, Keo, Magic, and anyone else from the WBO Discord and anyone else who were able to help out with this tier list. Greatly appreciated for the input. That way it could be the most informative as possible and also the most fair as possible. That being said, as we are ending off, I want to mention please subscribe if you are new here with bell notifications on. And make sure to check out our store, which is an optional way to support the channel. We have DB, BU stuff. Hey, it's on topic because now you can get some parts that are pretty good from our shop. It's an optional way to support the channel. I appreciate any support regardless. Thank you for watching. Have a wonderful day and bye.